De Rocío.
Adiós, guapa.
Fado to the Portuguese people is like our national soul. But Fado is universal. And the language is not a frontier. You don't have to understand what I'm saying. Because Fados have the power of crossing that frontier and make you feel emotions.
Marisa is one of the young stars of Fado, Portugal's most distinctive music. Music that's dramatic, melancholy, full of longing. The word Fado means fate or destiny, and the music is inextricably linked to the streets of Lisbon. It's like a soundtrack to the city. The first gramophone recording of Fado was made in 1902, but the form dates back much earlier. Fado isn't folk music, but urban, a song of the city. Fado typically speaks of love and longing. It also speaks of Lisbon itself, a city shaped by the sea, fishing, and Portugal's former empire in Africa and Brazil. Today in Portugal, Fado is very much alive and enjoying a revival. Fado's success is also international. Marisa has won a big audience in the UK, and she's in demand in concert halls around the world.
I say all the time, yes, fado is melancholic, but I prefer to call this melancholic happiness a magical melancholic feeling. When you finish your fado, when you finish the poem, you've been cleaning your soul, and everybody's like, oh, it was good, and we laugh. We don't cry, you know, because you don't see the Portuguese people all the time crying. You see more than laughing.
The story of fado begins in the early 19th century. During the Napoleonic Wars, Portugal was invaded by French troops, and the royal family decamped to Brazil for 15 years, moving the capital of the empire to Rio de Janeiro. The roles reversed. Portugal virtually became a colony of Brazil and was open to its influences. These influences are crucial to the history of fado.
Fado was originally an Afro-Brazilian dance, which was very popular in most of the large cities in Brazil. And we begin to have the first references to fado being sung in Lisbon around 1830, which coincides more or less with the return of the Portuguese royal family from its exile, with all its returning of thousands of people accompanying them. And it started in Lisbon in the taverns and in brothels of those poorer neighborhoods of the city.
The most important of those neighborhoods is Alfama, on the steep slopes of the Castle Hill, which run down to the river Tejo. Alfama had a racially mixed population of laborers, sailors, and fishermen.
In Alfama, in the early 19th century, this is where fado was born. There were many taverns where people got together and sang. Of course, some of it is being gentrified, but I think it still keeps quite a bit of its old character. I mean, there are people who have been living here for 50, 60 years, families that have been here in several generations, lots of different kinds of bars and so forth. So there is real life here. It is not a museum part of the city.
For a long time, fado was certainly a slow dance, syncopated, with lyrics that dealt with sentimental topics. And then gradually, that syncopation seems to have been lost, and it seems to have transformed into a song which would keep some steps, but which would become more lyrical and purely musical in nature. What has remained, of course, was the sort of bluesy melody in the minor mode, common in Afro-Brazilian song. And it was something that all took place around this neighborhood.
Vielas de Alfama, ruas da Lisboa antiga, não há fado que não diga coisas do vosso passado. Vielas de Alfama, beijadas pelo luar. Quem me dera morar para viver junto do fado. Vielas de Alfama, beijadas
I was born in Africa, in Mozambique. We moved to Lisbon when I was 3 years old.
Mostra. Pois ó.
Esse é o papai.
Ai, é o meu pai.
My mom, she's African, she's from Mozambique.
As meninas. Não.
As meninas foram
Não,
ver
senhor. Não. Isto é na
My father is the typical Portuguese man.
Tão azuis, que ele ficava tão mal.
And we moved to this very traditional neighborhood in the center of Lisbon with Moraria.
Moraria is on the shady side of Lisbon's Castle Hill and got its name in the 12th century when the Moors were resettled here.
Foi um choque. Claro que quando cá cheguei, achei diferente da minha cidade, da minha terra, porque achei uma cidade velha. E a minha cidade era uma cidade nova. Entretanto, a gente veio viver para a Moraria.
Ainda mais velho.
Mais velho. Ainda mais velho. Um bairro velho, cheio de problemas, como se sabe.
Como a gota nascente, minha mão é transparente aos olhos da minha avó. Entre a terra e o divino, minha avó negra sabia essas coisas do destino. Desagua o mar que vejo nos rios desse desejo de quem nasceu para cantar zambeze feito texto de tão cantado que invejo Lisboa por lá morar.
My parents, they had a small taverna in Moraria, and I grew up in the middle of the sound of fado.
Então tinha na sexta-feira, vinham normalmente os trabalhadores que gostavam de cantar fado. Normalmente trabalhavam no cais, outros trabalhavam no fado, exatamente. Vinham cá. Outros.
A sexta-feira?
Não, isso era da sexta-feira. Ao sábado, já não. Já eram estilo os artistas mesmo que vinham, que acabavam os fados onde eles eram profissionais, depois vinham para aqui se divertir, cantar uns com os outros. E ao domingo, normalmente, eram os aposentados que chegavam aqui e gostavam de se lidar uns com os outros e cantar uma cantiguinha uns aos outros. Gostavam de fazer, como ainda hoje há muitos que fazem aqui. No bairro Alto ainda está com casas assim no género, que é o cliente que chega ali e canta.
I remember a very small place, dark, because to sing fado, the fado singers, they don't like too much light. I was very small, you know. And I used to look by the open spaces of the curtain, you know, and trying to look and see what was happening in the taverna. And I said to my father, can I sing fado too?
Vejo cabelo em trança e o canto morno do fado num cheiro de caracóis. Como num conto de fadas, os batuques são guitarras e os coqueiros girassóis. Minha avó negra sabia ler as coisas do destino na palma de cada olhar. Queira a vida ou que não queira, disse Deus à feiticeira, que nasci para cantar, que nasci para cantar, que nasci para cantar, que nasci para cantar.
Even today, Moraria is still a rather run-down district of the city. Like Alfama, it was one of the cradles of fado and home to the first fadista, whom we know by name.
This house is very, very important for the fado history and for the neighborhood of Mouraria, because in here was born the first woman who used to play the Portuguese guitar and used to sing fado in a very special way. Her name was Maria Severa, and she was the symbol of fado singers, you know.
Maria Severa was the first icon of fado. She was a prostitute, and she seems to have been very beautiful. She was born in 1820, and by 1840, she became the mistress of the Earl of Vimioso, the head of one of the most distinguished aristocratic families in the country, and a bullfighter also. And the fact that she was brought into Vimioso's palace and had the chance of actually singing for some of his aristocratic friends had quite an impact. And then, after having been dropped by the Earl of Vimioso, she died a couple of years later on, at the age of 24, of tuberculosis. And so the whole thing gave her this aura of sort of traviata, as if being such a dramatic singer would necessarily doom her to an early death.
Ser fadista é dar a mão à saudade, que anda a chorar por cidade, é ser pobre como altivez. Ser fadista é destino que se perdoa, ora sou fé de Lisboa. Ser fadista é ser português.
Maria Amélia Proença, she's a very traditional fado singer. She has 60 years singing fado. She has a lot of history on her voice, and she teaches me a lot.
Ser fadista é dar a mão à saudade, que anda a chorar por cidade, é ser pobre como altivez. Ser fadista é destino que se perdoa, ora sou a fé de Lisboa. Ser fadista é ser português.
I have beautiful memories of this place, Adega Machado, because when I was 7, we came here, and it was the first time I was singing in a professional fado house. And these places, they are very, very important because they are the schools. Fado is an oral tradition. We don't have a conservatorium to go and try to learn how to sing. We learn on the streets, we learn on the tavernas, or we learn in these type of places. And here you could see the best fado singers, the most traditional ones, singing, and in some way you try to learn.
Dos vestidos cor-de-rosa, dos pregões tradicionais.
Ai, Mouraria, das procissões a passar, da severa voz saudade, da guitarra soluçar.
There are usually two guitars accompanying fado, a regular Spanish guitar and the instrument that brings that delicate, tingling sound to the music, the guitarra portuguesa.
Ai, Mouraria, das procissões a passar, da severa voz saudade, da guitarra soluçar.
I love the sound of the Portuguese guitar. And it's a beautiful instrument. I like to call a female instrument because they have a shape of a small heart with 12 strings. The sound is very, very, very sweet. Sometimes it's like velvet, sometimes it's melancholic, Sometimes it's like tears. You don't know exactly what it is. And some musicologists say the Portuguese guitar comes from the English lute.
The instrument actually came to Portugal through the English colony in the north, in Oporto, who dealt with the port wine industry. And this is how it was introduced, first to Oporto, and then to Coimbra, and then to Lisbon. Until Armandinho appeared, who is a famous guitar player who lived between the 1890s and the 1940s. The guitar accompaniment was very, very simple. Just simple chords, you know, a simple chord progression to give some support to the voice. But since Armandinho, the guitar has been playing the role of second soloist.
A minha relação com a guitarra portuguesa é muito forte. Chega a ser muito pessoal, muito íntimo. Isso tudo estreita muito a relação com o instrumento. Deixa de ser quase um instrumento, passa a ser algo vivo, não é? Algo que também tem coração. Não é?
The Portuguese guitar make the introduction of the song, and suddenly when the voice appears, when the voice starts singing, the Portuguese guitar follows and answers the voice.
Este silêncio do Tejo, sem ter boca para beijo, nem olhos para chorar. Gaivota presa no vento, barco de sofrimento que teima sempre em volta. Gaivota presa no vento, barco de sofrimento que teima sempre em volta.
A relação com a cantora é muito importante. Também há alguma química entre toca e quem canta. E a cantora diz, aos gestos, da maneira como divide os versos, isso influencia muito.
Lisboa, cais de saudade, onde uma guitarra canta triste fado. Quando a alma se agiganta, a tristeza também canta, num pranto quase parado. Quando a alma se agiganta, a tristeza também canta,
Fado isn't only melancholy and longing, though. There's another, hidden strand of the story that's both surprising and virtually unknown.
A ciência humanitária, símbolo do altruísmo, tem por base condenar Deus, pátria, militarismo.
By the late 19th century, Fado was mostly a working class song, very politically committed. You have Fados talking about Marx and Lenin later on. And in fact, it was a left-wing, working class, socialist-oriented type of song.
Ainda o mundo há de assistir aos pobres livres do jogo, espezinharem o verdugo da burguesia a surgir e depois, quando existir o ideal que vem dar esplendor e bem-estar, incitar patriotismo, a miséria, o anarquismo, tem por base condenar. Mas o povo sossegado esfacela-se sobre a tortura quando o seu mal tinha cura. No ideal desejado quer viver martirizado nas garras do servilismo, vai alargando o abismo à fanática humanidade, pois fia-se nesta trindade Deus, pátria e militarismo, pois fia-se nesta trindade Deus, pátria e militarismo.
In 1926, after a succession of unstable governments and even civil war, there was a right-wing coup d'etat. Portugal became a fascist dictatorship, and they wanted to bring Fado under control.
One of the first concerns of the new regime was to make sure that all the lyrics were subject to censorship, that no lyrics which had not been previously approved could be sung in public. And of course, all this heritage of socialist, working class, labor type of lyrics were absolutely forbidden.
You had to have a specific permit to be able to sing. The words were censored, and during the fascist regime, Fado was institutionalized.
Still, the regime didn't trust Fado and would not recognize Fado as a national song because it was originally sung by people of ill repute, prostitutes, thieves, marginals of all sorts, and of course that did not carry great prestige for a song of national identity.
Portugal was officially neutral during World War II, but after the war, the fascist regime felt isolated in democratic Western Europe. Instead of condemning Fado, the regime decided to try and use it for its own ends.
The regime felt the need to adapt and cultivate a strategy of public relations, so to speak, with the Portuguese people that wouldn't be based anymore in the nationalistic, propagandistic slogans, but would try to promote family values and just caring exclusively about daily life. And those were the lyrics that Fado adopted very easily. There was a certain tacit alliance between the regime and the Fado world.
Vivi no bairro da Bica, ao princípio da ladeira.
Before the dictatorship, that socialist Fado we heard had warned against the trinity of God, nationalism, and the military. Now the message was something blander.
Três coisas fazem vibrar a alma do Zé Pofinho. Três coisas fazem vibrar a alma do Zé Povinho. A trindade popular, guitarras, mulheres e vinho. A trindade popular, guitarras, mulheres e vinho.
Fado was very useful in economic terms because it was an exotic product attracting tourists. And that meant that the original hostility of the regime against Fado was replaced by manipulation.
Maria na quinta-feira deita chale de marido. Maria na quinta-feira deita chale de marido. Como queres ser cantadeira, segue lá o teu destino e viva a tua maneira. Com o lenço bem plebeu, um instante a cantar, podes viver o
The greatest name and personality in the history of Fado was Amalia Rodrigues. From her debut in 1939, her star quality quickly took her to the big Fado houses, to theatres and the cinema.
E quem nasce mal fadado, melhor fado não terá.
Over and above the political background of the post-war period, Amalia became a national icon.
Ninguém foge por mais forte ao destino que Deus dá.
Amalia used to sell oranges and lemons on the street, but someone noticed her and invited her to sing. That's why people felt so in connection with her, because they know her background and they know even if she was a big diva, she was a woman who knew exactly what it was to be poor.
When television started in 1958, the national broadcaster Arte I was keen to embrace Amalia, and Amalia was keen to embrace the new medium. This is her first performance on Portuguese television.
Amália, muito obrigado. E em nome da RTP, os nossos agradecimentos pelos estudos e espero-vos a última vez. Faz-nos essa promessa.
Também espero.
Venha menos nervosa.
Eu vou-me despedir. Boa noite. Muito agradecida pela atenção. E prometo, se isto continuar, estar menos nervosa, menos preocupada. Cantar melhor.
Não acredito.
Um abraço muito grande e até à próxima vez, se Deus quiser.
Boa noite, senhoras e senhores. Em nome da Amália Rodrigues, da RTP. Boa noite.
Os portugueses inventaram o fado, para a natureza que têm. Nós tivemos muita razão de queixa, sabe? Do mundo. Porque estávamos aqui, neste sítio que ninguém cá vinha se não quisesse. Não tem fronteiras com ninguém, senão com a Espanha, que estavam sempre lá com as espadas e não sei o que, com as guerras, ou então o mar, que era uma desgraça, que era desconhecido, tinha medo, e saímos para o mar daquela maneira. Portanto, tivemos muito tempo a sofrer, para estar à espera, e isso é uma queixa, o fado é uma queixa.
She was a very clever person and ambitious. She tried to be surrounded by the most prestigious poets and composers of that time. Amalia was, I think, the first fado singer who really had the vision of crossing frontiers.
Mas logo os teus olhos disseram que não, que o sol penetrou no meu coração.
Amalia's career was spectacular. She was one of the most internationally successful singers of her day. She toured extensively in Europe, Africa, Japan, and North and South America.
She was incredibly popular, both in the sense of being loved by the people, but also in the sense of having popular origins that mark her very clearly as an artist. But at the same time, she was always very refined in her literary tastes. So in that sense, she has always managed to build a bridge between the purely popular fado traditions and a more ambitious cultural project.
Amalia paved the way for modern fado. She was the first singer to commission new lyrics and to set existing poems to music, like this one about the dignity of the poor.
What makes Amalia an icon is her great musical talent, her beautiful voice, and her feeling for the poetry. Prior to Amália Rodrigues, the vocal style was rather simple. There's very little ornamentation, and it's just really a vehicle for expressing the words.
When she starts singing, she was singing in a different way. She's doing what we call melismas, you know, because she's doing like she was singing like these. And normally the fado singers, they didn't used to do this type of things with the voice. And Amalia, she brought that for fado.
By the 1960s, Antonio Salazar's regime was fighting brutal colonial wars in Africa, in which Portuguese soldiers were dying in large numbers. The regime was starting to unravel.
Não temos só o dever de merecer os mortos, temos também o dever de ser orgulhosos dos vivos.
Along with the stage-managed rallies, the regime's fado fiction was moving even further from reality.
Numa casa portuguesa fica bem, pão e vinho sobre a mesa. E que à porta humildemente bate alguém, senta-se à mesa com a gente. Fica bem esta franqueza, fica bem, que o povo nunca desmente. A alegria da pobreza está nesta grande riqueza de dar e ficar contente. Quatro paredes caiadas, cheirinho alecrim, cacho de uvas doiradas, duas rosas no jardim, São José de azulejos, mais o sol da primavera, uma promessa de beijos, de dois braços à minha espera. É uma casa portuguesa com certeza, é com certeza uma casa portuguesa. É uma casa portuguesa com certeza, é com certeza uma casa portuguesa.
Throughout the 60s, the opposition against the regime grew immensely, and fado was seen more and more as an instrument of the regime, and there was an enormous antagonism towards fado on the part of the younger people. They accused the regime of using the three big F's as pillars for its survival: fado itself, football, and Fatima. Fatima being a religious shrine of the Virgin in Fatima, which was used very strongly by the regime.
On April the 25th, 1974, tanks were on the streets. Army officers sick of the colonial wars in Africa organized a coup, and the regime collapsed. It was an extraordinary moment as Portugal emerged from nearly 50 years of authoritarian rule.
When the democratic revolution took place in 1974, opposition to the tradition of fado was enormous, and fado was condemned as a sort of a legacy of the previous regime. And for more than a year, it was difficult to listen to a fado in Portuguese radio.
Over the next decade or so, fado was marginalized, tainted by its association with the politics of the past. Then slowly but surely, it started to reassert itself and reclaim its place in Lisbon's musical life.
The debate over whether fado was fascist or not was completely over by the 80s. And so, gradually, a new generation of fado singers appeared.
Disse-me conheces quando há no meu fado palavras amargas que da vida herdei. Disse-me conheces português trigueiro, falso aventureiro que o sol envelhece.
At the same time, youth culture began to feel the effects of globalization, of foreign mass-produced music being sort of bombed over them. And this need for local identity, I think, began to emerge as a very strong trend within youth culture in Portugal. And fado seemed to be very useful for that search for identity.
Por trás da minha janela, nos lençóis onde me deito, há uma lua que vela, escondida no meu peito. Há uma lua que vela, escondida no meu peito.
Nem remorso só te faz lembrar o que te dei e tu retribuíste. Mas como santo Deus, tudo apagado nesse teu coração descontrolado.
Palavras nuas que beijas quando a noite perde o rosto. Palavras que se recusam aos muros do teu desgosto. Palavras que se recusam aos muros do teu desgosto. O meu cigano adorado, viver abraçado ao fado, morrer abraçada a ti.
Of those younger fado singers who have built a career internationally, I think Marisa is clearly acknowledged as the top exponent of fado in the younger generation. In fact, she is as deeply loved by the Portuguese audiences as by her international audiences, which is something that hasn't happened often since the time of Amália.
Boa noite. O grito na despedida de Amália. A grande fadista foi hoje enterrar no Cemitério dos Prazeres, acompanhada por um mar de gente.
The death of Amália in 1999 marked the end of an era. Portugal declared 3 days of national mourning, and her funeral was attended by an estimated 100,000 people. It's hard to imagine any other singer in any other country who represented the nation and a style of music as Amália did.
Sou do fado, como sei, vivo um poema cantado de que eu inventei.
Amália was really a queen. She was representing us, and she was our mirror, showing us to the world. And I think that's one of the things that people really start loving.
Chorei, chorei, poetas do meu país, troncos da mesma raiz, da vida que nos juntou. Se você não estivesse a meu lado, então não havia fado, nem fadistas como eu sou.
Marisa shares some of the characteristics that made Amália such an important character in the history of fado. First of all, she comes from a popular neighborhood where there is a living fado tradition, and she heard fado sang around her all her life from a very early age. She is also very concerned about her stage presence. She's very dramatic, very theatrical, in a way that does remind us of Amália also.
When people write, you are the new Amália Rodrigues, I feel they're not being fair to the memory of Amália. Amália was unique. It's not going to exist a new Amália, like it's not going to exist a new Edith Piaf or a new Tom Jobim. You know, each person at our own time.
Ever since Amália, fado singers have continued her search for new poetry and ways of expanding the repertoire. It's how the music is developing. Marisa is working with Pedro Campos, who's composing for a fado singer for the first time.
Então, mas a ideia desta música surge como? Quando tu pensaste neste poema?
Isto surge um bocado na sequência de tentar abordar Lisboa de uma maneira diferente também. Começa por aí. Porque eu acho que o fado é uma canção muito típica e muito que vive de alguns códigos próprios e clichês. E aqui eu tentei fugir um bocadinho a isso.
Pois, porque não é fado, não é? Disseste-me que não era fado.
E eu tentei fazer alguma coisa de fado, né, em relação à canção. Para ti, não é? Nomeadamente. Mas não... Quer dizer, mas não é um fado. Penso eu que não é um fado. Tu sabes isso melhor do que eu.
Não. As coisas podem-se cantar de uma forma mais afadistada ou não, mas...
Claro.
Pode não ser fado, não é? Então canta lá para eu ouvir, anda lá. Vamos ver.
Ando na berma, tropeço na confusão, deixo a avenida e toda a cidade estende-me a mão. Sigo na rua a pé e a gente passa apressada falando. O rio de fronte voam gaivotas no horizonte. Só o teu amor é tão real. Só o teu amor.
Vou tentar.
São montes as ruas e o trânsito não para o sinal. São 1000 pessoas atravessando na vida real. imigrantes ciganos. Um dia normal, com a brisa que sopra do rio, ao fim da tarde em Lisboa, afinal. Só o teu amor é tão real. Só o teu amor. What I'm singing about Fado in the 21st century, I'm singing about this new Lisbon. I'm singing about this new generation who I'm part of. I'm singing about love. Gente que passa, a quem se rouba o sossego. Gente que endereça as filas do desemprego. São vendedores, polícias, bancas, jornais, como os barcos que passam, tão cheios, tão partindo do cais. Seu teu amor é tão real. Sou teu amor, seu teu amor é tão real. Sou teu When I'm singing Fado, I'm singing poems who are talking about the feelings of life. Passion, jealousies, happiness, love. You know, the meaning of love for me is not the same for you. But when I'm singing, you are understanding it your own way. And you feel an emotion. So when we are talking about Fado, we are talking about a music who knows exactly how to explore the feelings of life. Sei dizer se é um fado que ouvindo há um ritmo novo no ser que tenho guardado, ouvindo a sua quem seria se desejar fosse ser. É uma simples melodia das que se aprendem a viver. Mas é tão consoladora a vaga e triste canção que a minha alma já não chora, nem eu tenho coração, sou uma emoção estrangeira, um erro de sonho
é tão consoladora, a vaga e triste canção que a minha alma já não chora, nem eu tenho coração, sou uma emoção estrangeira, um erro de sonho e dor. Canto de qualquer maneira e a